Hello and welcome to the Services School Stories podcast. You'll hear from veterans and partners who'll share their stories and insights about how you can use higher education to transition from the military and achieve your goals. Now let's get going. All right, I'm going to start this podcast off by listing 6 schools: UVA Darden, Northwestern Kellogg, Columbia Business School, MIT Sloan, the Wharton School, and Harvard Business School. Getting into any one of these programs is a tremendous accomplishment. Our guest today, Dan Chauvin, got into all 6. I know Dan well. We worked together when I was on an activation in the Navy. He's a Naval Special Operations officer, a very impressive person. But the big theme on this podcast is resilience. They say you can't teach heart, and Dan is someone who has exhibited a tremendous amount of heart throughout the process, coming back from failure and pushing himself to face rejection. And that character trait is what has enabled him to succeed. So Dan and I are going to be talking about that and his keys to success in the MBA application process. So with that, Dan, tell us about yourself.
Of course. First off, just wanted to thank you for having me on, give a chance to, give back, tell my story. Really appreciate it. And it's good to see you rocking the Commander's gear, even though we had a disappointing loss this weekend. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. area, also a huge Commanders fan, just like yourself. Growing up, moved around quite a bit, but then we settled back in Northern Virginia area. I went to the Naval Academy, probably because my brother went there. He started his freshman year when I was a freshman in high school. So I kind of watched him progress through his time at the Naval Academy. It seemed really cool to me. And then one year, my junior year, my mom was just like, Dan, all you do is talk about the Naval Academy. Why don't you apply there? And then that was that. So I applied, I got in, immediately found out about Navy EOD also because of my brother, and then spent my entire 4 years with the one goal of getting selected for Navy EOD, which I was fortunate enough to do. So then after I graduated, started the training pipeline. And now 11 years later, here I am about to get out of the Navy and go to HBS.
All right. Well, we'll dig a little bit deeper into that background story because I know you've done some pretty cool stuff. So, number one, tell us a little bit about what Navy EOD is, because every branch of the service has got EOD. Everybody does it a little differently. So, what makes Navy EOD different?
I think the best way to describe it, and it's really semantics, is that the other services are considered support, whereas Navy EOD are considered enablers. That term might not make sense to most people, but to us, it's something that we take pride in. We're the only EOD force in the entire military that our baseline qualifications allow us to support any special forces unit under the sun. So we go to dive school, we go to EOD school, we go to static line and free fall jump school, and then we do all the mobility and tactical shooting skills to integrate with Marine Special Forces, Army Special Forces, Navy Special Forces, everybody.
That's pretty insane. And again, not that many people know about the program. So I was with a reserve unit that supported a Navy EOD command for a few years, and I really got to learn about all the stuff they did. When I was at the Naval Academy, it was early 2000s. The community still hadn't really got as well known as it is nowadays, and it's still not even really that well known. So I didn't know that much about it. But really, kind of the way I like to think about it is to get into this community, you have to have kind of the mental acuity of a nuclear engineer, like a Navy nuke. So you have to basically be smart enough to be able to pass nuke school. But you also have to be physically fit enough to do the special forces type training. So like I said, dive school, free fall parachute, tactical shooting. How long does that whole training pipeline take?
The whole thing, if you don't fail in EOD school, takes about 2 years until you get to your first command.
Wow, good stuff. And so you've had some pretty interesting tours. I know you did a lot of time overseas. Would you share a little about your overseas experience?
Yeah, of course. So my first team I did out of San Diego. We deployed to the Middle East. I was in Syria for 6 months there. Got back and then immediately moved to Spain, where I was there for 5 years supporting another Army Special Forces unit. It's also where I met my wife, and we had our first kid a couple years after I showed up in Spain, which has been awesome. After Spain, we loved the overseas life. My wife and I decided that Bahrain would be a really cool destination to go, a part of the world that most people don't really get to travel around in because they don't really understand it, at least in my opinion. But having kind of been in this part of the world before, I knew that we would really enjoy it. And honestly, the last 2 years that we've been here, we both loved it a lot. Obviously, the work has been kind of crazy in Bahrain. 6 months after we showed up, October 7th happened. And then we were kind of been in an all-out sprint since then. It's been hectic but rewarding, absolutely. But needless to say, we're ready for a change, and that's why I kind of want to leave the Navy and go on to bigger and better things.
Yeah. You and I were there together for it. When October 7th hit, that was a
Yep,
pretty wild day. But
it was.
yeah, just going back to your deployment to Syria. So talk about the stuff that Navy EOD was doing there. Like, which units were you working for, and what was your specific mission there?
Yeah, so it was just my Navy EOD platoon there. We had 8 guys split into two-man teams, and each two-man team was supporting a different Army Special Forces unit that are called ODAs, Operational Detachment Alphas, and we were kind of shotgun throughout the country. Our role was to basically provide freedom of maneuver to that force, and then kind of fit in where we found our little niche once we got to like the location we were operating in. So me personally, I loved the mortar system that our team had, and I loved all the guns. So I just assisted the weapons guys on my ODA. I became their secondary mortar gunner, which was probably the coolest experience I've ever had. Um, and then when we weren't doing stuff supporting our partner force, there was a lot of chemical weapons that ISIS had kind of left behind. So as Navy EOD, we also get training in kind of rendering safe and disposing of chemical warfare agents. So I got a lot of exposure to that, which is pretty unique.
Oh wow.
Pretty unique thing to do. Wearing a gas mask, dealing with a weapon that when you pick up, it sloshes around. It's kind of crazy, but that was probably the highlight, I think, of my trip, because not a lot of guys in my community have had the opportunity to actually put their hands on something like that.
Gotcha. And that was all stuff that the Assad regime had. Those are basically chemical weapons that the Assad regime was using on civilian population, and it was
So
your
that
job to dispose of it.
So this specific stuff is actually that ISIS was using against
Oh,
the civilian population.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So we never got a hold of any of the Assad regime stuff, but this was all ISIS. We were kind of in a part of the country where luckily we didn't cross paths with the Assad regime. We were just there to fight ISIS and make them leave that portion of the country.
Okay, gotcha. That's pretty impressive. So that was like Eastern Syria, if I'm not mistaken.
It was like northeastern. Yep.
Yeah, Northeastern. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so
Yep.
that's not a lot of people know about all that went on there. And what was this, like 2017-ish time frame,
So
if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken? Yeah.
2017, correct.
Yeah. Not a lot of people know about what was going on there, and it's in the fact that we had people out there doing good stuff like you're doing, putting themselves at risk is something we need to pay a little bit more attention to and
Yeah.
celebrate. So cool. All right, and then Spain. We talked about your experiences moving to Spain. You told me you hadn't traveled much outside the U.S. growing up, and so what was it like? Just like, because the cool thing is when you're serving overseas, you actually get to go and live. You're not just deployed to a country; you're actually living
Mhm.
there. And what was it like to just move to Spain as a young officer and kind of set up living overseas?
Honestly, it was wild. Like you said, I think I've been out of the country maybe 4 or 5 times before, but those were spring breaks to the Caribbean with my college roommates. I think when I was in the academy, I was in Ireland for like 36 hours when Navy played Notre Dame. So when I went to Spain, it was a culture shock. It really was. But like you said, we live out in town, so just kind of being integrated within the Spanish culture, it was a really cool experience, and it's something that I didn't really realize how much I loved it because I'd never experienced it before. But needless to say, I fell in love with it. I ended up staying in Spain for 5 years, married the love of my life, who I actually met 2 weeks after I showed up. She was a huge reason why that transition ended up becoming so easy for me. And then I kind of struggled my way to learn Spanish. And now that was 7 years ago since I moved there, and it's crazy how time flies. And I'm actually going back on Sunday to get ready for the birth of our second child. So
That's awesome. And yeah, so cool. And then that was in Cadiz, right? The
yeah, so
Rota.
the base obviously in Rota. My wife is from Cadiz, which is about 45 minutes east of Rota. But I lived in Rota for a couple years at first, and then I moved to Cadiz to live with my wife.
Very nice. And if I'm not mistaken, I got to get my geography right. So that's Atlantic side, not Mediterranean side of Spain, correct?
Yeah, it's the Atlantic side, like an hour and a half from Gibraltar, give or take.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Very, very, very cool.
yeah.
All right. Yeah. And then so then shifting gears to Bahrain. So we met up in Bahrain. I remember I just written my book,
Yep.
Breaking Business School. Quick plug for that. And so Dan was the new guy, and I was like, all right, yeah, let's go grab some beers and catch up. And then I think we started talking about business school and talk us through like where you were at mentally, because the interesting thing for like a lot of our listeners is that kind of 20-year career progression, because a lot of people will, kind of do their initial 5 to 8 years, get out. That's what I did. And then if you've kind of crossed that like 8-year threshold, you kind of hit the lifer, the 20-year plus mark or career trajectory. Now you're at about, if I'm not mistaken, about 8 or 9 years in. So where were you at mentally, and what made you decide to go the business school route and get out a little later than most people do?
Yeah, so when I got to Bahrain, I was actually leaning more towards making it a career. I had already applied to business school and got rejected, but I was doing that under a Navy scholarship. So even though I applied to school, I had every intention of returning back to the Navy after that, paying back the time that they would have paid for my tuition, and then gone a full career that way. But then when I met you, hearing about your experiences with Wharton and McKinsey and stuff, and then I read your book cover to cover, I kind of started to change my outlook a little bit, realized that if I was going to go back to school in the Navy, that investment that you're making on yourself isn't, you don't really get to reap the benefits of it if you then go return, finish your career, and then 10 years later, you're trying to capitalize on that network that you make in business school. So actually, thanks to you, I started to kind of rethink that, and then ultimately, struggled with the decision for about 3 years, and then finally decided to just take the leap, and we're getting out.
Yeah. It's a tough decision, right? Because so you're married, you already had at the time one child, planning on
Yep.
growing your family, and the military really does give you that that security blanket of a dependable salary. At that point, you're already, I believe, you've been selected for lieutenant commander, so
Hmm.
you were in it for, like, regardless, you could get 20 years out of it and then a comfortable retirement. And so making the talk us through the decision to go for that unknown, open yourself up to a little bit of risk, and with your family, leave the comfort of the military.
Yeah, I think it comes down to quality of life. Like you said, the military gives you a lot of stability, but you also sacrifice a lot that people don't really realize. It's not just deployments; it's everything. It's long working hours where you don't get paid overtime. Obviously, you make the same amount of money no matter how much you're working. It's missing family events with your family back home if you're stationed overseas. And then in our specific situation, my wife has her family in Spain. I have my family in the States. Yes, we could get stationed in Europe, but either way, we're going to have to travel to see someone's family because we're probably not going to Spain again. And then if we end up in the States, then we're half a world away from my wife's family. So for us, it was really the quality of life and taking that risk, going into the unknown, so to speak, not knowing what career path we'll find in the future. It was worth it for us to kind of try to build the life that we want as a family. Now we're bringing another kid in. It's just, I love the military. I loved every minute of it, but we're just ready for a change. We're ready for some stability. Yeah.
No, I got you. And then the decision to go to business school versus just getting a day job, because give me your, we'll get a little bit into some more of your background qualifications, which are very impressive in a bit. But oftentimes people can say, well, the military is not for me, but I don't want to take the risk to go to 2 years of school. Talk us through the decision you made to go to business school, vice makes it get out and just go directly into the workforce.
I think honestly, getting out and going to school is a way to buy down that risk. I probably could have gotten a job if I had just gotten out and applied to a bunch of different places, but I would probably have more pressure to accept just the first one to make sure that I had an offer and we had a plan getting out. On the flip side of that, getting out and going to school, yes, I'm not going to have an income. My wife's not going to be working because she's going to be raising our newborn. But to me, I'm okay with that because the benefit of being able to go to a business school and go directly into the workforce is that chances are you are going to get a job, and chances are it's going to be a much better one that I would have gotten if I was just applying to any job leaving the military. So that was kind of where our head was at, where you just decide to live 2 years kind of scraping away the best way you can. Obviously, we'll have VA benefits to help us get by. But we didn't really see it as much of a risk going to the school that I ended up deciding to go to.
Yeah, and I'm a huge advocate for the MBA route, I agree entirely with what you're thinking, because the bottom line is when you're in the military, you don't know what you don't know. You don't really have a great perspective on the different types of careers that are out there and how you can really best position yourself for success. When you go to a very strong business school or even just a decent business school, you increase your stock in the private sector, so you'll be making more money when you get out. You'll likely be going in at a higher position. You'll also have a better understanding of like the different types of industries that are out there. You'll get to meet with people who aren't in the military, where you can get their perspectives and really understand how to best set yourself up for success for the rest of your life. So big fan of the business school route, and I think you made a smart choice, which is no surprise given your background. And so one more thing, so I will get one more thing about your background, then we'll start talking about the business school thing. So
Yeah.
we touched on October 7th, and one of the things I found really impressive about you, Dan and I worked together fairly closely at our command, and it was really leadership in crisis. As one of the things about working overseas is you never know when you're just going to show up to work, specifically in the Middle East. You'll never know when you're just going to show up to work and the whole world will have changed, or the whole world will be kind of on fire in the matter of a few hours. October 7th happened, and you were placed in a position where you were leading the delivery of aid to Gaza. So can you talk to us about how you approached that crisis, how you assembled your team and got that mission accomplished?
Yeah, that was kind of a tricky one because we actually planned it twice. Because, like you said, originally after October 7th happened, once the dust settled, we got into November. Our higher headquarters had basically tasked out this idea to build a floating pier, which is a capability that the Army has to deliver aid. So at that point, I wasn't really involved in the process. I had provided inputs for what my command could provide for this effort. And then they planned for about a month and a half. And then basically higher headquarters basically said, shelve the plan. Let's wait until conditions are better, so to speak. So then a couple months went by, and I think it was around March or April, this started kind of coming up again. But whereas the Marine Corps was in the lead the first time around, the second time the Navy was in the lead. And specifically my task force with the capabilities we were tasked to be in the lead of protecting all of the forces at sea. We weren't going to be on land at all. That was the Army show. They were going to run the entire thing. So I was responsible for just the Navy portion in that delivery operation. So in terms of assembling my team, at first we just kept it small with people in our command, people that you probably know from working here. We put a basic plan on paper for how we would protect what was going to be built with the forces that we had. And then we sent that up through our higher headquarters, got them to take a look at it, and then the thing just kind of snowballed out of control, right? So then we started talking to coalition partners, working through translation barriers and video teleconference to try to see what they can provide to help us. Basically just a tug of war match of seeing what we could do. And then ultimately, the U.S. decided that we were not going to be protecting ourselves anymore. So all the planning that we had done for, at this point, 4 months, was basically just break class in case of emergency. Our partners that we were supporting were going to be the ones protecting us at sea. So it was a lot of work. It was incredibly busy. And at the end of the day, we didn't get to execute the plan that we created. But we set the framework for our partners to fall in on. We told them where to go. We told them how to best situate themselves to protect from the threats that we identified on land. And then ultimately, the operation was a success. We opened that corridor and got some aid to people that were really in need of it.
That's so awesome. And just kind of just using this as a setup for the rest of the conversation, I want to just kind of underscore what you've done up to this point. So you went to the Naval Academy, got in there, which is no slouch. And then just a quick question, what did you major in and what kind of grades did you get?
So I was an aerospace engineering major. I chose the astronautical engineering track, which basically it's satellites and rockets and stuff like that, just not airplanes. And I had a 3.79 GPA and graduated in the top 10% of my class.
Yeah, not too shabby. And then you go and join. I did not myself graduated in the top 10% of my class. I'm very open about the fact that I barely scraped by to 2.85 GPA as an English major. Putting what you've done in context is very important. So very tough school, very tough major, top grades. You then went on to one of the most elite communities in the military, where you had to go do all the special forces training on top of that learning how to defuse everything from chemical to nuclear weaponry. You went to Syria, you diffused chemical bombs. You lived overseas. You delivered aid to Gaza at the same time. You raised a family. So you're a very, very impressive person. That was one of the reasons when we were
Thank
talking.
you.
I was like, you should be applying to business school. So getting back to, well, we just put it into, I think it was about this time last year, you made the decision to start applying to business school. I advocated for my alma mater, Wharton, and you were looking at applying to Wharton and MIT. And just talk us through like kind of like your first set of applications there last year when you were going through those two schools.
Yeah, so I did what I wouldn't recommend anyone to do. I was studying for the GMAT and trying to take the GMAT at the same time that I was writing my applications, and I was kind of doing everything in a bubble. I think I sent my essays and my resume to you. You helped out a lot to tweak them. But because I was trying to balance the GMAT and the applications, just simply ran out of time and I submitted what I thought to be a good product and a pretty good GMAT score. And like you said, you thought you were pretty confident that I would get into at least one. But I only chose two schools, and as we'll see as we keep talking, that was probably mistake number one in the first place. But yeah, so I applied. I didn't get an interview to Wharton. I found that out. I think I was in Dubai with my wife in the aquarium, and I was holding my daughter when the email came in. And then I did get a interview to MIT. I was applying to the LGO program for the second time actually, and then I did not get in. So
yeah, so for me personally, that was a big shock. Given your background, I thought that you definitely would get in and to at least one of those programs. And my gut reaction is that you got unlucky. Maybe like the wrong person had read your resume. You applied in round two, and another thing I thought that could have a contributing factor could have been the fact that this schools might have been oversubscribed with veterans. But yeah, to the listeners, like I just want to emphasize that don't take it personally if you don't get into business school. Like what you're seeing is like one of the most capable people I've ever worked with. Got unlucky that first time. And then, I remember we were talking, and one of the questions I asked you was like, have you ever failed before? And I think your answer was no. So is that like this is like your first failure, right?
academically, yes, I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, and that's the thing with veterans is we are conditioned to succeed. Like every training pipeline you go through, it's like a zero failure mentality, right? Like you don't fail. If if you want to be an EOD tech, you have to graduate from EOD school. And same thing for me in like new school, you got to pass. So, if you want to be a SEAL, you got to pass buds. There's no real like option for failure, and we're conditioned to fear failure and take it very personally if we do fail. But the thing is, we have to calibrate our mindset because in the real world, there are second chances. There are multiple places where we can't succeed in similar venues. So, if you apply to multiple business schools, all you need to do is get into one. And so to succeed in the private sector, you have to surrender a little bit of that ego. And then for the listeners, you got to recognize Dan's like one of the most capable people out there, and he failed twice, but getting into business school the first time. So let's talk us through how you picked yourself up, how you dusted yourself off, and how you crushed it the second time around. And just kind of like the big thing here is there's a saying that, you can't teach heart. And this is like working with Dan the second time. This is what I really saw was, kind of the motivation to get back after getting knocked down and having the heart to give it a second go. So let's talk through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So after I found out I didn't get in, so this would then be the second time because I had applied 2 years prior. So I guess my collective experience for my first two applications was my first real academic failure. And like you said, it just didn't sit well with me. But I was talking to my wife, and we knew at this point that we wanted to get out of the Navy. So then I started, looking for jobs, right? I threw out my resume to a couple different positions, didn't get contacted by any of them, probably because I was over a year from when I could start working, or because, in my opinion, I just felt I wasn't qualified for those jobs without an MBA. So that resonated with me quite a bit. You know, if I really am getting out of the Navy, I need a plan. And I think the best way to get the stability that I have in the military is to go to an MBA program and get a job immediately after graduation. So looking back over my experiences, like I already said earlier, the worst thing I could have done is study for the test. At the same time, I was writing the app or doing the applications. So I enrolled in the Smart with a Heart GRE prep program. I took the GRE the first time I applied, just kind of doing self-study. Took the GMAT the second time. I preferred the GMAT over I preferred the GRE over the GMAT, so that's why I chose to do the Smart with a Heart. I did the whole program that they have offered for veterans or service members, where you just get access to recordings. It's like 13 weeks self-paced, and it was incredibly beneficial for me. I learned how to take the test and realized that the self-study that I was doing, which essentially amounted to doing practice problems, wasn't actually studying at all. It was just practicing problems that you're never going to see again, because you're not going to see those on the test. So working with Nafiz and Jay from Smart with a Heart, they kind of teach you the code that you need to crack. And because the hardest thing about these tests is the timing. It's what I ran into when I was taking both the GMAT and the GRE the first time. I just didn't finish. Never did. When I took it the first time after Smart with a Heart, I had no problems with time management, anything like that. I didn't get stumped on any of the questions, because they kind of gave me the blueprint to how to do it. So once I finally hit the score that I was aiming for, then I focused on the applications. I took some advice from you. I enrolled in services school, which was, can't say it enough, the reason I got into 6 schools is because of services school. You guys put me in touch with a guy who was about to enter HPS, and he, putting it lightly, demolished me. He tore my resume apart, tore my essays apart, but it was what had been missing. Like, you helped me the best you could the first time with the time that we had, but having someone just kind of focus on your application with an objective lens is really what kind of, I think, got me over the top. I also reached out to every veterans club at all 6 schools. The great thing about veterans is that everyone wants to help another veteran or another soon-to-be veteran. So literally every school put me in touch with somebody, sent my resume and my essays to those people. They provided edits and told me what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what kind of fits the school, what doesn't fit the school. And they really collectively helped me just tell my story, which I think that's just what these schools care about the most, is telling your story. And I think from speaking with you and speaking to some of these people at veterans clubs, is that most people that are applying from the military, they don't really think that they have a cool story, because the stuff that they do seems so normal to them. But to people who aren't in the military, we do some really cool stuff. You just need to be able to tell your story in a way they'll understand. So you kind of need to humble yourself in a way. And also at the same time you're humbling yourself, be an arrogant version of yourself and be that person that can really be like, yeah, I deployed to the Middle East and I blew up a chemical weapon. It's like, that's really cool. I'm going to tell something about that in my application so I can stand out. Or I helped deliver aid to Gaza. Incredibly important thing that at the time I didn't want to talk about it at all because I was so sick of it. But it ended up being one of the things that I talked about the most in my application. Yeah, that's how it went the second time around.
Yeah, man. So there was a lot to unpack here. So first of all, yeah, no, like, I mean, big thing. First thing I'll ask is number of people you asked for help, because I had a similar experience when I applied for business school. So first time around, how many people did you have reviewing your essays, and second time around, how many people did you have reviewing your essays?
So the first time around, I think maybe 4, and they were all in my family. So my dad and my brothers and my mom. The second time around, 5, because I add you to the list. And then the third time around, probably 50, I would say. I think I sent my resume to at least 30 different people. And then the essays, there was like maybe a group of like 4 or 5 core people outside of my family. Because I know that people outside my family would give me the most honest feedback. And that was really what kind of helped, is just different perspectives.
Yeah. And so you talk me through the resources you use. So the first time around, you just didn't really do anything. Like, I mean, well, sorry.
No.
I'm not counting the first LGO time. I'm talking about the first time you applied to Harvard and Wharton, so like this time last year. So you basically didn't really get any GMAT help. You didn't. The only essay reviewer you had was me, and so while I like to think that I'm the best there is, there, I am not, and there are many other people out there that you should be getting help from in as many perspectives as you can. So basically, you went from like one person reviewing your stuff, no real help. Second time around, you had a formal GRE coach, you had a service school mentor, you had me, and then how did you reach out to other people? Did you reach out to schools, veterans clubs, or how did you go about getting those additional reviewers?
Yeah, so I started with the veterans clubs, like I said, because I only knew people at Harvard. I didn't know people. Actually, I knew people at Harvard and Wharton. I didn't know people at any other four schools. So I used the veterans club as a way to reach out, and all of them responded within a couple days, and all of them were extremely responsive once I sent them my resume and my essays. At Harvard, I had quite a bit of friends from the EOD community that were there. So I reached out to them, and then also my services school ambassador was about to start Harvard. And then I knew one guy at Wharton again from Navy EOD. He took a look at all my stuff and just helped me again tell my story is really what I was focusing on.
Yeah, and one of the great things too, because you talk about the different people that are giving you advice. I remember we had a conversation where like we'll disagree with each other. Like I remember one of your mentors told you something about one of your essays. I was like, well, I don't really agree with that. And so the point is like you have a back and forth, and like you can bring up something another one of your advisors said to another advisor and kind of pressure test those different perspectives, right? And then you really, at the end of the day, you're the one who clicks submit, and so people will give you different perspectives. And at the end of the day, you got to be authentic to yourself and just really kind of bring all these perspectives together. So kind of like talk to me a little bit about the different perspectives you got, and I already kind of was a spoiler, like your advisors didn't all agree with each other.
Yeah, I think for that, what I finally realized is that when you're writing your essays, you know when they're close to being done. So when I got to that point is when I started getting conflicting feedback from people. So to me, if one person who is in the school I want to go to says one thing, but one person also in that school says a completely conflicting thing, well, maybe I just meet in the middle and keep it where it's at because I mean, which way do I go at that point, you know? So that actually, I use that as a tool to know when I could stop editing and stop kind of pulling my hair out. I mean, I sent my wife back to Spain for 2 months so I could work on these applications in some quiet in the house. So I was putting in a lot of hours to get all 6 applications in on round one. And yeah, feedback will never stop coming if you keep asking for it. So I think a good kind of key for people who are applying is that when that feedback starts to conflict, you're probably done and you can probably turn your attention to something else.
That's awesome. And that I've actually never heard that, and I think that that's a pretty good perspective. It's like when when people start debating like the finer points of your essays, you're good. When they're not like, well, your this is just a mess. And they're talking like, well, like maybe you should frame this a little bit more like that. You're probably in a pretty good place. And I that held true for me. I had multiple people going through my application, and then I did get that tough love. I always talk about my service school mentor. I'll give him a shout out, TJ Root. He was a HBS grad, and he was a 160th pilot, Night Stalker, incredibly bright guy, and he kind of taught me everything I know, and I'm glad that I was able to pass what he taught to me onto you. And you just told me you signed up to be a service school ambassador, so
I did. Yeah.
it's gonna be great that you'll keep that passing on. But he would just annihilate my essays, and it was just like so much of this game is just surrendering your ego and recognizing you're entering a new ecosystem, and you will need to, and whatever you did in the military, as cool as you thought you were, you have to recognize that you're not as well equipped to succeed in this environment as you think you are, and you need to take the advice of people who have been through that if you want to succeed. And so, yeah, TJ, I equate it to, I don't know if you've ever seen Billy Madison, but where he gives that speech and the guy is like, yeah, we are all now dumber for having listened to that. Worth 0 points. May God have mercy on your soul. Like that was when I first submitted my essays to him. Like that was his feedback to me. And like by the end, he was helping me out a little bit more. And then also to your point about bigging yourself up, I think that we as veterans tend to downplay ourselves, and we live in a community where we know people who have made the ultimate sacrifice, who have done some pretty impressive stuff. You coming from the special operations background, for me, I saw, a lot of people, classmates of mine in the GWAT era who did make the ultimate sacrifice and who dealt with some very, very tough situations. And I always felt humbled by my peers. And so I never felt comfortable really like on my resume talking about the stuff I did. But another one of my mentors tore my resume apart. I'll give him a shout out, Sean O'Neill, another DC guy, Gonzaga grad, my classmate from the Naval Academy, and a huge Commanders fan. But he was just like, dude, you gotta sell yourself, because every other veteran out there is selling themselves, and if you don't put yourself out there and talk about how great you are, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because everybody else is doing that. So again, you have to abandon. It's like you have to put your. I guess the way to look at it is you have to put your ego aside and abandon any form of humility you had when writing your resume. So yeah, that is just like a little bit from my experience. So, well, very cool. All right. So, and then, sorry, I'll talk about just like getting into the right headspace. So talking about, you sent your wife away, just like I've got in my head this vision of you as Rocky, like studying for the GMAT, like coming home saying, so talk to us about like how you isolated yourself, how you got distractions away and focused fully on crushing those applications.
Yeah. Luckily, my sister-in-law was getting married in September. So that was kind of my target date to have everything finished by the time I left for Spain. So my wife took my daughter and my dog back to Spain sometime in July. And I think I had already taken the GRE once. And then the first couple weeks that they were away, I started on my applications, and I was kind of in my reset time between my second GRE, where I just did kind of, some targeted practice in the peace and quiet of my house here alone. And then I took the test again, and I got the score I was looking for. And I used that as motivation to then put my head down and really throw myself into the applications. I think what helped me though is the first couple of times I applied, I already had the bones of a resume. Obviously the one that I submitted looks nothing like the first ones that I did, but at least I'd already taken the time years prior to, put my accomplishments on paper, and then it was just, tweaking from there. But the essays, every essay I wrote this year around, I didn't even look at the ones from years past, because obviously they got me nowhere. So I focused on just starting from scratch and thinking about things in my career that I would want to talk about, and thinking about ways that I could link them together, because every school has multiple essays, What I made a concerted effort to do is each essay kind of builds on itself in the application, because that was kind of my way of, even though you're limited to a word count, if you kind of tell the same story or the same themes throughout all your essays, you do a better job of telling the admissions committee, the person you are. And that's kind of what I focused my effort on with the applications.
Cool. All right, Dan. So, one of the toughest parts about MBA admissions, or really just transitioning out of the military, is dealing with rejection and getting the mental fortitude to dust yourself off and get back up after a rejection. And so getting those MBA rejection letters obviously was not fun, very demoralizing, especially for someone who's been used to as much success as you've been used to. So talk us through the mental process you went through to re-engage and give it another go. Like, how were you motivated, or how did you get yourself motivated to give it that second chance, or that second attempt?
Yeah, so I think that motivation took a while to kind of come back, because when I didn't get in, at that point, it was my second time applying. And when I was talking to my wife, it's like, hey, if we apply this year, even though we're getting out next year, we'll be able to defer, and that'll give us some stability and know where we're going. Obviously, that didn't pan out. So then I was like, okay, the next best thing would be applying for a job, which I did, and again, failed. I didn't get past it. I got one interview at one place, submitted my resume to a couple else, and they never reached out. So to me, or at least the reason that I thought about that, is that, oh, well, I don't have an MBA, so I'm not qualified for these positions that I think are interesting to me. But I didn't know if I wanted to go back through it all again. Yeah, doing all the applications, it's a lot of work. Studying for the test is a ton of work. Doing them both at the same time is extraordinarily difficult, especially when you're working full time, especially with everything that was going on here. So I wasn't going to apply again, and I was leaning towards staying in the Navy. And I had been offered a scholarship to go to school, so I knew I could go sometime in the future, but I just didn't think it was going to be, turn around and apply right again. So I kind of went by about a month or so. My wife and I went on a vacation to Mauritius, and I just kind of had a little reset time. And that's kind of when I was there. I was like, I'm not going to not apply again. Like, that would be quitting. And I've never quit at anything in my life. So why would I do that now for the first time when at the time I was 32 years old? So when we got back from the trip, I just kind of threw myself into the application, doing the smart with a heart and all that stuff. And honestly, what I used as motivation was not wanting to stay in the Navy for another 10 years. I wouldn't recommend that to most people, but that's really what got me going. Because I knew it was going to be more difficult for my family if we stayed in for another 10 years. We're spread out to 2 continents. My family's shotgunned all over the United States. And we just knew that the stability that the military offered, while nice in terms of salary and benefits and stuff like that, your life is anything but stable. And that was really the motivational factor to, dust myself off and do it again.
Yeah, it's family is a powerful motivator. Yeah, and really, like the theme for this podcast is resiliency, and really like dusting yourself off and motivating yourself to succeed after you've had a disappointment. And I'll just share really quickly. This isn't my podcast. This is Dan's podcast, but from my experience, that was the big shock for me when I got out. It was something I really had to calibrate myself mentally to do. And for me, it was less the MBA rejections. I did not, like, unlike Dan, I did not bat 100 or 1,000 rather at my in my MBA applications, but I got rejected from a lot of jobs. And for me, it was just failure after failure after, for interviews, like some of the most selective companies. I'll be honest with the listeners, because it's important for y'all to hear this. Like, you see, when I put my resume up there, I'm like, oh yeah, I was at McKinsey, Wharton. That looks like really impressive, or I like to think it does. But the reality is, I got rejected by BCG. I got rejected by Bain. I got rejected by Google. Like, all these top tier companies I was applying to throughout my transition process. I actually got rejected by McKinsey the first time I applied for them. And these were companies I interviewed with. So like going through the interview process and getting told you weren't good enough is very, very demoralizing, because for me, I started taking it personally and I started doubting myself, because like Dan in the military, I had not really known failure. I succeeded across the board. I struggled to pass nuclear power school, but I passed. And for me, the big thing that I came to realize was that you only fail when you quit, right? And that's kind of what you saw with Dan. Had Dan just quit after that first round, he never would have had that first round of rejections. He never would have had the tremendous success that he had. And likewise to me, had I quit when applying for top jobs after that first round of multiple rejections I had from those great firms, I never would have succeeded. So the bottom line is, you got to just keep at it, because the selection rate at these companies and at these universities is really, really small. Like, I think that the military advertised that the toughest school to pass is BUD/S, which has got like a 25% success rate. Well, like, the admission rate at any MBA, at any top tier MBA program is well under 20%, right? And so your chances of getting in there are lower than a candidate passing through SEAL training. So it's pretty brutal. Companies like Goldman Sachs, any of the top banks, consulting firms, they accept like 1% of applicants currently, give or take. And then even if you get an interview, like when I was working at McKinsey, it's like 30% of people who get interviews, and it's very, very hard to get an interview there, end up getting hired. You have to really just get it in your mind that no matter how well you did in the military, or how impressive you are going to fail, right? You might not get hired by the company you want to get hired by. But what will make you succeed is resiliency, getting up, dusting yourself off, and giving it another go, and failing again, giving another go, because if you try enough, you will succeed. And I think that Dan's story is kind of, really, really emblematic of that. And that's one of the main reasons we wanted to have him on the podcast, so he could share that and help motivate other students who might be in his position, who might get those rejections, and have them just kind of keep going at it. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dan, and I want to know what's next. So where are you going to business school, and what do you plan to do there?
Yeah, I'm going to HBS, Harvard Business School. I'm interested in going into defense technology after, but if that doesn't pan out, I'm also very interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition. That's something that I can kind of use my leadership experience I've gotten in the military with the best business education the world has to offer, and then go and, acquire a company and turn it around, or enter a business, a startup style business, and then build it to a more successful organization.
That's awesome, man. And you're gonna have such a good time at Harvard. Like what I remember, I was talking to one of my friends, and I was he was an HBS grad. I was just on my way to Wharton, so I had a long layover in London. He went and he was working in London. I went and grabbed a coffee with him, and he was like, "I'm so jealous of you. Like you have no idea how happy you're gonna be for that, how much you're gonna enjoy the next 2 years." And I was like, well, thanks for that. And I'm telling you the exact same thing. It's going to be an incredible experience. But at the same time, like when I got to business school, I dealt with a lot of rejection. I got turned down I thought that I had the golden ticket going to Wharton. I got turned down for interviews. I got rejected by companies. And again, it was just kind of keeping my head up and thinking that I only really had to get it right once, get hired by one company, and all the rejections in the world don't matter if you get it right once and get to a place you want to go. So that's kind of my parting wisdom to you. And then Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you to give any last minute words, any parting shots to the listeners about your experience.
Yeah, first and foremost, use services school, and then secondly, cast a wide net. I didn't need to apply to 6 schools, but having not had any luck, I decided that was the best thing to do. And my mentality was, playing the averages. Out of 6, I had to have gotten into at least 1. And out of all the 6 schools, I saw myself going to either one of them. And at the end of the day, I got lucky and I got into all 6, and I got to go to my top choice. And that's probably the best advice I can give to anybody.
It's awesome, man. Dan, thank you so much. And
thanks,
we expect to hear great things.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.